Okay, today is a continuation of things that have been spoken about in the past couple of chaburas, such as status of corporation, halacha, and it's also, they tell me that this year Shabbos HaGodol is Erev Pesach, and Mini Yisrael is when Shabbos HaGodol is Erev Pesach, you say the Shabbos HaGodol drosha the week before. Yes. So this is the week of the Shabbos HaGodol drosha. So we'll talk about both of them together. But in the manner of the Yiddish speaker who, before he got up to speak, said, before I talk, I'll say a few words. I also want to say a few words. Actually, I have a lot of words to say, but I'm not going to say them. So just a few words as a kind of an introduction. I heard years ago in the name of the Brisker Rosa from Baruch, they said Ben Torah can go into any profession he wants, except law. Why law? Because law teaches you to think lehepech v'das Torah. Their concepts are the reverse of the reverse of halacha. He was, but any other profession seemed not to have any particular objection. He was either 50% right and 50% wrong, or 100% right and 100% wrong. I'll talk about where he was right first. Where he was right is, and I'll try to explain why he was right and why the situation exists. If you look at the American legal system, there are many, many areas in which whatever principles are expressed in the system are quite antithetical to what you will get from Shas and Bleich. I don't have to give you too many. There are numerous. If you talk about something like proximate cause, the way we define proximate cause, or the way they define proximate cause, for much of which they define as proximate cause, for us no more than a groma. You've got to have virtually a supervening cause in order not to have proximate cause. There's a whole history of interpretation of the notion in the common law system. If you talk about something like respondent superior, that the master is responsible for the acts of his servant, we say in shliach levar, it could be a hepech and a hepech. If you talk about something like a will, it's interesting. Moshe couldn't understand the common law system to the point where he thought that a will is a kinyan tumta. He didn't realize that a will causes property to pass achar misa, not before. So he thought, no, so will's like somebody once showed me, there's one state in the Union in which it passes after Misa, not before Misa. And just as an aside, only because if anybody knows the source, please let me know. I once found in a book, a textbook on property. It was a woodcut that was reproduced, and I was just glancing at it. I saw it, and I went back afterwards, years afterwards, to try to find it. Where was it? I can't find it. But I found it very, very revealing. It had a picture of a coffin being taken out of a manor house and loaded onto a hearse. The hearse was a horse with a carriage behind it. And underneath was a kind of a caption saying that in the common law system, or words to that effect, it was assumed that the estate passes with the taking of the lord of the manor from the manor house into the hearse, is taking him to the funeral. I took that when I saw it the first time. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that it might come to use some other time, that they also understood that you can't have something achamisa. So they had this interval between being dead and being put in the hearse. During that period, it could pass in one way or another. If anybody could find that woodcut for me, I would appreciate it very much.
I did see a Far Side cartoon where the piano in the library going straight up said, well, he is taking it with him.
Okay, it will help me. And, something like products liability. For us, products liability can't be more than a kroma. And I won't even talk about bankruptcy, because bankruptcy is machlokes shnuyah, to say the least. Only I will point out that the people who think that bankruptcy is recognized in halacha for more than is really in halacha is because of the fact that the Brisker was right. You come with a certain mind fix, and you want to put a square peg into a round hole. So the halacha and the American law system are more or less the same. Or goes that you get influenced one way or the other, and that's what he says. That if you buy it all, you can start thinking krum in terms of halacha also. The real danger is the danger of chauvinism. That's natural, I suppose, but Jews are, I think, more prone to it than other people. Anything good that they have, we had before them, and do you want better, we probably taught it to them in the first place. I don't remember the name of the author, but there is a book with the title Jewish Law in American Courts. It was published in the late 20s or early 30s by a professor of law at the University of Pennsylvania, in which he has chapter after chapter trying to show where common law, American law, where it all comes from halacha. Was he right? Was he wrong? I'm not terribly interested. There's another book that should be written, American law as misrepresented, Jewish law as misrepresented in American courts. I'll never write the article because I can't break a satire on it. But if you look at the cases which cite American, it would take half an hour to give you examples. If you take all the cases in which they cite American law, they either get it wrong. Jewish law. I'm sorry, they cite Jewish law. Either they get it wrong or they misinterpret it, one or the other. So leave that aside. But and I'll even talk about corporations. Bialdusi, when I was maybe 13, 14, 15, I thought that corporations were tzibur. We had the concept of tzibur long before they had the concept of corporation. By the time I was 16 or 17, I learned a little bit of Shura and discovered that you have to make a birchas tzitzis on the tzitzis belongs to the kol. I realized that tzibur is not a corporation at all, that it's really shutfim. And it's got le'arizeh kuhumazeh. But when I was growing up, I thought the corporations and tzibur were one of the same. It was krum. Medusa, but Mr. Rove was right. I came with a kind of a prejudice because I knew a little bit. You picked up from the newspapers, knew a little bit of American law. I could multiply the instances in many, many cases. The other part where the Riskarov was 1,000%, 100% wrong, or if you prefer 50% wrong, if it was 100% wrong, 100% right, or 50% right, 100% wrong. What was wrong is he thought other professions are okay. There's no problem with other professions. There's not the profession per se, but the problem is that we grew up, or I grew up, I can't speak for anybody else. I can say that my grandchildren, great-grandchildren, are 6 generations in this country. They are not Americans. They grew up in Flatbush and in Lakewood. I'm only a 3rd generation American, but I am American to the core. And I have to do, sometimes I have to struggle to overcome it. They don't have to struggle to overcome it. Them is a double question. And I could hear it talk for another half an hour, talking, giving you all the examples in which this is true. And that's because we live in a culture that has a totally different value system. I'll give you just one example, which is related to law, and it's probably taken out of context. There are better examples. But I think I said once upon a time when we were learning in Nazar that as a child, I was trying to teach myself Yiddish, and there was a magazine called the Yiddish Wort. And it came one month, monthly. It came with a story. The story I don't remember anymore, but it had a picture of a Reformed clergyman. And it described he was Mesader Kedushin, the second marriage for a woman who did not have the benefit of a get. And he wrote a tshuva. And he was holding the tshuva in the picture. And the tshuva said, I was able to read the script, that was Hebrew. Tami bedovar dina the malchusa dina. Now I was, young enough, old enough to know that it was to behevel, but obviously. But the part of the American psyche is that dina malchusa dina must be at least one of the Taryag mitzvahs. I'll give you one example taken out of context and not significant in and of itself, but I don't think it's a secret that in this country, Dina Malchusa Dina is regarded with utmost severity, And in European Jewish society, it was lefech. I'm not saying they were right, I'm saying they were wrong. I'm not saying we're right, I'm saying we're wrong. But it's part of the culture in which we grew up. And the example of that is, I once, browsing the library, came upon a series of yearbooks published by Union of UHAC, of American Jewish Congregations, Union of Jewish Congregations of America.
Reform.
Not the Reform. The OU.
Oh, OU.
Yeah. No, yeah. Union Orthodox Jewish Congregation, sorry. It was yearly, it was an annual. And it had the proceedings of the annual convention. Now they're biannual, I think they were annual then, whatever it was. And several issues, one after another, they were inveighing against these European rabbis who are mesader gittin without benefit of a prior civil divorce. And they thought that this was absolutely horrible. And they were shein kamayu. It was never also. And later the legislature in New York had to rectify all this by passing a statute which said explicitly that it is not contrary to the law to have a religious divorce prior to a civil divorce. The only thing that's contrary to law is to pass something else off as a valid divorce in the state of New York. And that was to be made as sure upon all these people who were doing it anyway, not to make them criminals or whatever. But that was all because they were very concerned about this concept. It was one of the concepts they were concerned with. They were born and bred. A European, I'm not saying he's right, the European would kind of laugh at the whole concept. But that's what we're living in, and it's important to know that there are different Weltanschauungen, and that ours is not necessarily, in fact, it's usually not identical with that of the American culture. And I can give you examples in every facet of life, but then we wouldn't get to what we really have to talk about. This is a kind of ideological assimilation that is taking place, and it affects you. And I can tell you that it's hard to overcome. Well, you have to know it's there in order to overcome it. But if you don't know it's there, you can't overcome it. It reminds me, and this is just a Dimion Bialma, there's a Teresh Yisrael that has a report. Where it comes from, I don't know, but it comes of a painter who painted a picture of Moshe Rabbeinu, and the picture of Moshe Rabbeinu had him as a depraved, cruel, mean individual. That's what he looked like on the picture. And somebody showed it to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu said, "That's right, that's what I look like. That's what I am. I don't act that way. I don't behave that way. It's because I was gleifer on my tunis. But my basic tunas weren't the Moshe Rabbeinu tunas." Sorry?
That's a Shemta preacher.
Not the Teresh Yisrael. It's okay, whatever. And the source, I know that the source is not known. I suspect that it's not a very reliable source. But the Musa Haskell is there. There are people who have tunas and nefesh, and they have to overcome tunas and nefesh. And I will not relate it to the matters at all. The Hanev and Yovin. In any event, that's where we're starting from. So let me say that as a kind of akdama, and let me go now to the concept of a tzibur and Erev Pesach. Erev Pesach shechal, the Shabbos particularly, the Shabbos Godel Drosha is good only for the years in which Erev Pesach occurs on Shabbos. I have three sources for the Chavur today. The first is in volume 1 of Nesivos Halach. It's printed there with things that we're not going to talk about. Anyway, these are Shabbos Shuvah Drosh. You'll have the Drush there also. Shabbos HaKodesh, I'm sorry. The second comes from the 8th volume of Contemporary Halachic Problems in two separate places. One which talks about the natural law basis of the revealed law, or worse to that effect. And the other is in the miscellaneous dealing with a Hakdama to Masechta Bava Basra and the Vilna Shas. It was somebody written by a person, Moshe Levi Horowitz. I think he's listed as, or he's titled as the Abad of Pinsk, and it's there in context of historical controversy concerning the Vilna Shas, not the Slavita Vilna controversy. That was different. Partly somebody in Berlin was putting out a Shas to compete with the Vilna Shas, and people were coming out volume by volume. People had already paid to make Kedima, and they were supposed to be paying for every volume as it arose. And apparently the Berlin was much cheaper. And he's writing here what's the effect of Tshuva, which is made a preface to the Bava Basra. A lot of ones had already been printed, but this is when Bava Basra was printed in the middle of the controversy, explaining why you're mechuyev to pay the Demei Kedim that you promised. And don't talk to me about the technicalities of halacha, but basically he says that it's a kind of an a priori concept that you made a contract and you have to abide by the contract. And in both of those cases, you'll see that there's a concept of a priori, what I call the natural law concept. And I'll come back to that when we get to our topic a little bit later, not the Shat's problem. But the other part that comes in the a priori basis of dogmatic law, or at least the Torah Shabbat. So let me start first with the Gemara dealing with Erev Pesach Shechal B'Shabbos. So we have a Gemara in Psochim Samach Vov, Toner Rabbanon. Halacha zu nis almo mibnei b'seiro. Ham achas abo oselius b'Shabbos come out Erev Pesach and Shabbos. Shok chuvela yodu in Pesach deiches Shabbos in Loi. They didn't know. You bring a Korban Pesach on Shabbos. There are malachas involved, obviously. The Shvit itself is a malacha. So they ask, Klub yesh odom yidea in Pesach deicha Shabbos Eloi. Omru lahem, odom echad yesh olom mibavel, v'hilel abav lishmai. Shishimesh negdili hadur shmaya v'avtalion, v'yidea in Pesach deicha Shabbos Eloi. So he got Nid Hillel, he got it from Shmaya Vaftalion, and he's going to tell them, Shol Chuvakarloi, Omrloi, what kind of kash is this? What kind of shail is this? Klum Hatu Yidei and Pesach Teichas Shabbos in Loi, Omrlehem, V'chi Pesach Echod Yeshlona B'Shona Shedeichas Shabbos, Haloi Harba Yisr Mimasayim Psochim Yeshlona. You have 200 Psochim that Teichas Shabbos. Why shouldn't this one be Teichas Shabbos? Where are the 200 Psochim invented to Midim, which are every day, plus the Korban Musaf. Those are all Deichei Shabbos. Omerloi minayin l'cho. He said, how do you know this? Omerlahem nemar moed b'Pesach v'nemar moed b'Tomid. Ma moed omer b'Pesach Deichei Shabbos. Similarly, the moed omer b'Pesach is also Deichei Shabbos. If Tomid is Deichei Shabbos, then Pesach is Deichei Shabbos. It's Exer Shavah, Mayadai. Then he has the second time. Void Kavachemrahu. Umatomich ein Elnish Korish Deichas Shabbos. Pesach Elnish Korish, and it didn't Deichas Shabbos. He's telling me if the Talmud is Deichas Shabbos, so Pesach, certainly Deichas Shabbos. Kavachemer. The Talmud, if you don't not macro it, there's no Chiv Korish. Not macro Korban Pesach, there'll be a Chiv Korish. Now, the first kasha is a very simple kasha, a very obvious kasha. I don't know how the Bnei Rasera were learning in their yeshiva, but if they were learning Al Seder Hashas, as they did in Voloshin, it was only later that things changed differently, but that was part of the Masera. Then they learned Shabbos before they learned Pesachim. And if they learned Shabbos before they learned Pesachim, then they should have known the Gemara Pesachim and Beis. Pesach sheshachtu b'midbar b'Shabbos shochtu. They say that the Pesach in Midbar was on Shabbos, and the Pasuk says they shechted in the Midbar. Sharei shom isa v'ahi b'chodesh harishon shana sheni zbechad l'chodesh shuka v'mishkan tana oisa yom notol atzara ataris rishon l'maisa bereshis etc. etc. What's the cheshbon? Sharei, how do we know that it was Shabbos? Rish Chodesh be'echad b'Shabbos hoya. B'chosh Rish Chodesh be'echad b'Shabbos, that's the one that's Torah Torahs, Rish Chodesh Nisan. Muchachu Shabbos yom shlis HaChodesh kal b'Shabbos. Like this year, Sunday was Rish Chodesh, and Erev Pesach is going to be on Shabbos. You can't have it any other way. There's no Shona Muberes that puts in a few days between Rish Chodesh and Erev Pesach. So, and for Shitas Pesach, the Pasuk says, by Dabra Shomesh, Shana Shin says, Mitzvah Chodesh Rishon Lemor. By Yas, if Yisrael Pesach B'Mayad, if that's not enough, it says It says that they did this Pesach Rishon Barbos Yom L'Chodesh Ben Rabbayim B'Midbar Sinai Kechol Asher Tziv Hashem Es Moshe Kenos Bnei Yisrael. That includes the Shechita Pesach. So in the Midbar they brought it Erev Pesach Shechal B'Shabbos, and if they learned Shabbos before the Pesachim, they should have known that the Korban Pesach is Doichi Shabbos. What was the stuff in the first place? The answer to that kasha means a little bit. It comes in a different way. Is an Or Sameach. The Or Sameach is not the Or Sameach. The Or Sameach was published, or the article of the Or Sameach was published in a periodical. I think it was the Hamayon in Toshin Lamed Ches, I think. But it's a piece with the name of the Or Sameach on it. What does the Or Sameach say? Because of Mechilta. A Mechilta Parshas Boi. V'shochat oise kol kal adas Yisrael minayin at oimer shim'ein l'Yisrael pesach echad shekol mitzrim b'yidei chivason Talmud leimar v'shochat oise kol kahal adas Yisrael v'shochat oise. There's discrepancy here. There's a singular and a plural. V'shochat is plural and oise is one. You have everybody shechting Stephen Korban Pesach. It's impossible. So he's saying that Kol Yisrael is rated with a single Korban Pesach. And if that's not enough, you have a Gemara in Kedushin and Beis. Shekol Yisrael Kulam Yitzim Pesach Echad Talmud Leimar V'Shocht Yisrael Kol Kahal Yisrael Ben Rabbayim V'Chi Kol Kahal Kulam Shechtim V'Alei Shechtim El Echad Elakan Mikol Shekol Yisrael Yitzim Pesach Echad. So how can all Yisrael be Yitzim Pesach Echad? So Rashi on the spot says in Kedushin. Rashi says that he held that Korban Pesach, that Chil is not makim the Korban Pesach. Now again, the Or Sameach has a whole marochet in which he tries to prove the Mechilta held that Korban Pesach, the Yechil's Korban Pesach is makim. I'm not interested in the Rayis. Doesn't make a difference whether the Mechilta did or didn't. But he goes on to explain both Mechilta and the Gemara, not like Rashi. He says that there are two dinim in the Korban Pesach. There's a Korban Pesach that comes b'teres yochi. We know all about that. Everybody has to bring his Korban Pesach, and it is a Korban Pesach. But the Gemara says that the Korban Pesach, he comes b'knufia. It's different. It's an in-between, intermediate stage. Not a Korban Yochid really, not a Korban Tzibur really. It's a Yochid and Tzibur together. So he says that you see that the Korban Pesach is two separate things. It's a Korban Yochid and it's a Korban Tzibur. So he says that there can be one without we. How do you get the Korban Tzibur according to Or Sameach? You have all Yechidim together, you take them all together, and the whole is equal to some of its parts, and that becomes the Korban Tzibur. Every little Pesach together, I tell them all together, but one big Korban Tzibur. Says the Or Sameach, but the Mechilta is telling you that you can have a Korban Pesach with a Korban Tzibur without a Korban Yochid. What if you don't have enough Korban Tzibur to share? That doesn't mean that the Korban Tzibur is bottled. So Kol Yisrael can be Yitzeh with a single Pesach, and the single Pesach is there b'teiras Tzibur. It becomes a Korban Tzibur, and there is no Korban Tzibur, there is no Korban Yochid that year. And as far as the Korban Tzibur is concerned, there's no halacha that Chil is makiv. It's what's makiv the Chila is the Korban Yochid. For the Korban Tzibur, it's not necessary.
So if somebody's derech b'chayka, they have to bring.
We'll see in a second about that. We'll see about Pesach Sheni in a minute. But the same thing that the Or Sameach wrote in this article is in the Zera Avram, a little bit different, but the same Yisod, that there's a Korban Yochid and a Korban Tzibur, that's in the Zera Avram as well. Now, on the basis of that, it's pretty easy to understand the suffix of the B'nai B'Seir. B'nai B'Seir knew very well that the Korban Pesach in the Midbar was Nishkat on Shabbos. They only didn't know whether it was B'Teres Korban Pesach of a Yochid, and everybody shechted their own Korban Pesach, or it was B'Teres Korban Tzibur. L'mayin nafkamina. The nafkamina is whether everybody could bring their own Korban Pesach, or they had the ate with a single Korban Pesach. If you go back to the Psukim, there's no pasuk that says they ate the Korban Pesach that year. The Sarah didn't know. Was it Nechal? It wasn't Nechal. What was it? It was a Korban Tzibur. It didn't have to be Nechal. By the same token, it was a Korban Tzibur, and Korban Tzibur was Dechei Shabbos, but the Korban Yochid wasn't Dechei Shabbos. And you ate the Korban Tzibur with a single animal. I don't need everybody to bring an animal. If it's the Korban Pesach that's Dechei, then if it's the Pesach of the Yochid that's Dechei, then obviously everybody can bring his own Korban, but there's Yochid, and it'll be Nechal also. So that's the first. And then comes the Oid Kal V'chomer. Now, the Oid Kal V'chomer, I don't want to belabor the point. There are lots of, what do you need two reasons for? If you have Gzera Shova, then what do you need the Kal V'chomer for? So the problem is, you look in Rashi, you look at others there, that Hillel was telling them, if you Gzera Shova is only Kabbalah with Messiah. If you don't have Messiah for the Gzera Shova, I'll give you another reason. For that, you don't have to have a Messiah, Kal V'chomer, or the Bani Atzman. And he's giving them a new one, a new Kal V'chomer altogether. So he's saying, even if you don't think that the Gzera Shova is a good Gzera Shova, what's the Gzera Shova? I left out the point. It's Mayadeh Mayadeh. What is the Mayadeh of the Korban Pesach? It's Pesach Sheni. And Pesach Sheni is certainly a Korban Yochid. It's not a Korban Tzibur. So they're bringing Gzera Shova from the Korban Yochid of Pesach to the Korban, to Pesach Sheni, from Pesach Sheni, and they're telling me that the Pesach Sheni is just like the Pesach, it's just like a Korban Tzibur, and it's also Deiche Pesach. And there's also a Tosefta, if I can find it quickly, a Tosefta in the Ein Psochim that says that the Korban Pesach is Deiche Shabbos. Not only the Korban Pesach, the ordinary one, but Pesach Sheni also, and not only Korban Tzibur, but Korban Yochid also. So it seems to be almost like it's the words of the Tosefta. The Tosefta is telling you that this is what Mayadeh is teaching you. Mayadeh is teaching you that it's Deiche Korban Yochid, and Korban Yochid is the matir of the Korban Pesach. So obviously, in ordinary times, there's no separate Korban Pesach because Bob Knufia turns it into a Korban Tzibur. And we have all these individual Korbanos taken together, and putting them all together, you end up with a sum which is as great as the parts. Maybe not greater, but since all the parts together equal a Korban Tzibur, we've got a Korban Tzibur now also. That's one thing. But now let me go back to what is the purpose of the Kal V'chomer. The Kal V'chomer adds something very significant to the understanding of everything that we're talking about. Let me first talk about different kinds of mitzvahs. There are mitzvahs that are mitzvahs Yochid. We know all about them. Most mitzvahs are mitzvahs of Yochid. Every individual mitzvah is a mitzvah Yochid. Then there are mitzvahs that are totally in the tzibur, that are the tzibur's mitzvah. It's a mitzvah that's not an individual mitzvah. Nobody has to be mekayim it, but the tzibur has to be mekayim it. The gimel mitzvahs in Stav, mitzvahs Loretz, none of them was a chayvas Yochid. Yochid was capable of being a man melech. No, Yochid was capable of building a Beis HaMikdash. No, Yochid was capable of Mechias HaMolech, etc., etc. So that's a korban. That's a mitzvah of the tzibur. So you have mitzvahs, mitzvah which is a mitzvah of the Yochid, and then you have other mitzvahs which are mitzvahs of the tzibur. There are mitzvahs which are in between. There are mitzvahs of a Yochid, but there are mitzvahs which are totally in the tzibur. To take the obvious example, dealing with mitzvahs Rabbanon, maybe Parshas HaMolech. Maybe we need to Parshas HaMolech without reading from Kriyas HaTorah with a minyan, but certainly the Chiyuv the Rabbanon is to read it from a klaf, from a Sefer Torah, a kosher Sefer Torah, and to read it b'tzibur. So that's a mitzvah totally in the Yochid. People who didn't daven the whole year with a minyan went from Parshas Ocher because you had to be Yitzhak Parshas Ocher, and you can be Yitzhak Parshas Ocher, you done with a minyan. So all from the yeshuvim, the dorfs, they used to come to the city to be able to hear Parshas Ocher. There was a chayvas Yochid that was totally in the tzibur. In Mikra Megillah, Mikra Megillah, presumably the two didn't Mikra Megillah. I won't go into that in detail, but besides the Chedes Yochid, you have the Lechatchila here with Tzibur because of Presuming Nisa. Presuming Nisa is by definition with the Tzibur. So if there are two mitzvahs in Mikra Megillah, one's reading it and the second being fired from the nest, if we're reducing mitzvahs totally with Tzibur. So now we have to know, and there are other mitzvahs that can go into this analysis. I presume that Hakel is a mitzvah schal on the tzibur and the yochid. I'm sorry. It's also one of those mitzvahs that you have to bring in Moshe V'Taf. What do you bring them for? It must be because I'm going to bring them, and you don't have Hakel without the whole tzibur together. So it seems to be I can't read Hakel at home, so I have to bring it to hear it. It's probably a chiv yochid, which is totally in tzibur. Now in Korbanos, there are also the same thing. In Korbanos, there are Korbanos that are clearly Korbanos Tzibur, and there are Korbanos that are clearly Korban Yochid. Achatas and Osham, those all the standard ones that Baal Achet. Anything that's Baal Achet is a Korban Yochid. The Korbanos of the Shemenis Yemin is clearly a Korban Tzibur. No Yochid was responsible for the Miluyim. The Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur sounds to me as if it's a Korban Tzibur. The peasants bring it because they forgot halacha. It means all Klal Yisrael forgot halacha. The peasant Nagol forgot it. Well, everybody was in the Tzibur. They were teaching it to everybody. So who's mechuyev them alone? The whole Tzibur was mechuyev. Whatever they were doing was on behalf of Klal Yisrael. When you the Kapparas, and you the Kappara on behalf of Klal Yisrael also. They were all nichshon, the hero of the best Nagol. And then there are others which I don't really know. I think I mentioned this briefly on an earlier occasion. And I don't know what about the Tamidim and Musafim. I thought I can't bring a Tamid, but if the Tzibur brings a Tamid, is the Pshat that it's the Tzibur that is bringing the Tamid, or is the Tzibur bringing it because it's a collection of Yechidim? And every Yochid, and the medium softly different from Korbanos because it came from Master Shekel. What about you, Master Shekel for? Where did the Maroon come from? Where did everything else come from? All the other Korbanos were you going to be Matish to give it the Hektish? Let Hektish bring it. Why don't you have a Shekel for it? Let somebody give whatever they need for all the Korbanos. The answer has to be because everyone has to have a Chelik in the medium Musafim. So what's the shot? They have to have a chelik in themselves. It can be one of two ways. Either because I'm part of the tzibur, and the tzibur, this entity called the tzibur is bringing it, or it's because it's nothing more than a korban shel shutfim, and the shutfim we call the tzibur. I can't get 10 people together and say we'll bring our own little talmid. I need all of Klal Yisrael to bring it. So everybody has to be Master Shekel, and we bring it for everybody together. But it's basically no more than a korban of shutfim, which is like a korban yochid, but it's a korban yochid which is totally in the tzibur. And I think I've already said that if you look at Rashi in Parshas Korach, and Pasuk says, "Al teifen lohem al minchosa," the Rabbeinu spell that they shouldn't. Rabbi Shalom shouldn't be makabel the ketores of Korach of Adosoi. That was pshat, the first pshat of Rashi. Al teifen lehevel minchosa. What's the minchosa? The minchosa means the ketores. It's the gift. Here it's not the technically the korban mincha. It's the ketores. Don't take their ketores because it's not one of the korbanos. It's bever, it's an iser. Or says Rashi, the second pshat. The second pshat is more longest. The second pshat says, "Al teifno minchosam," in all of the korbanos tzibur. Don't burn up on the mizbeach the chelik that belongs to them, as if you could, you can distinguish their little chelik from the chelik of every other Jew. And he's telling them that they, if they're shutfim, it's chalukas hashutfim, or to put it in the reverse, if you see you can make a chalukas, it must be chalukas hashutfim. The tzibur can't be machalik. The tzibur is a tzibur, and it's more than the sum of the parts. The tzibur is a new entity, whatever it is. We'll talk maybe a little bit more in a few minutes. But the tzibur is a tzibur, and you can't divide the tzibur into parts. if you're dealing with a carbon of shutvim, and if the carbonas are nothing more than the carbon of shutvim, then you can say yesh breira, or you can make the breira. He's doing it. He's making it. He's saying this is the chelik of kerach, and this I'm not taking from you. Or at least that was what Moshe Rabbeinu was responsible for. Now, if that's true, then we can go back and redefine the statement of Hillel. And one is Gzera Shaveh, and number two, there's a Kal V'Chomer. What does Hillel say? Hillel's telling them, you want to know where to bring a Korban Pesach on Shabbos. Of course, you bring a Korban Pesach on Shabbos. Mayadai. I'm bringing you Gzera Shaveh from Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni is clearly a Korban Yochid. So you'll tell me that I can bring my own little Korban Pesach, just like I brought the Korban Pesach. It's no raya at all. What is Doichet? When I now look at the Korban Pesach, why is Korban Pesach Doichet Shabbos? Is Korban Pesach Doichet Shabbos because it's a hefts of Korban Tzibur? Or is it the Shabbos because it's Kavul Izman? We know this. We have the principle. Korban Tzibur is Doichet Shabbos, Korban Yochid isn't. But why is a Korban Tzibur different from Korban Yochid? A Korban Tzibur is Kavul Izman. So what does that mean? Is that the urzach? Is that the cause in and of itself? Or is that only a kind of a siman? Whatever is kavul izman is a similar to siman. Whatever is kavul izman is the korban is the Shabbos. So he's telling me, I'll bring you a raya. My raya is the Gzera Shaveh. If the Tmidim Musafim are Deiche, then the Korban Pesach is also Deiche. What's a Korban Tzibur? It's Kavul Izman. What's Korban Pesach? It's Kavul Izman. You'll turn around, Hillel knows very well that who told you that the Korban Tzibur is Deiche because it's Kavul Izman. It may be it's Deiche for a different reason altogether, because it's the Korban of the Hefts of Tzibur. Who told you that the Korban Tzibur is a Korban of all the Yechidim together? And the reasons it was Kavul Izman, and it doesn't have to be Korban Tzibur for that. I'll tell you that it's different. A Korban Tzibur is Doiche B'Teiris Korban Tzibur, and therefore, if it's going to be Korban, it could be Doiche, it'll only be one Pesach, but there's Korban Tzibur. Hefza Tzibur. How do I know that a Korban of Shutvim, the Korban Pesach, which is a Korban of Shutvim, how do I know that it's Doiche? Kal v'chomer, it's going to do with Tzibur Yochid, it's going to do Kavul Izman, not Kavul Izman. Suddenly it's all totally in the Chiv Koros. I need that only if you tell me that a Korban Tzibur is not a Korban of Shutvim. If it's a Korban that belongs to Tzibur in its entirety, then it needs a new limud. It needs a limud from the Kal v'chomer, and that was the Sof of Neibsera. And Hillel had to come to be patient for them. They were Mesupik. What's the halacha? They were Mesupik Rashi. Rashi tells me that a Korban Tzibur is one of two things. They didn't know, is it a Korban of Shutvim that's only bought the Tzibur, or is it a Korban of a Heftes Shel Tzibur? And Hillel, in effect, is telling him it doesn't make any difference. That either way, I have a limit for you. The first way is a Mayadai, and the second way is going to come from a Kal v'chomer. So that's the basic point. So the first part is from Siyus Halacha. That leads us to something else. The something else is also totally in the definition and the notion of a tzibur. It sounds as if it's coming from left field. That has nothing to do with anything we're talking about, but it has a lot to do with what we're talking about. You are all familiar with the Machlekes, the Bavlokas, Kedolos, and the Rambam, with regard to how you count the Aseres HaDibros. Balhag says, Anichashim Lekecha is not one of the Aseres HaDibros, and the Rambam says it is part of Aseres HaDibros. And the Gaboyim were Machriya, like by Rambam, because before reading Aseres HaDibros, B'Tzibur, they give a Pash on the Bina, and they give the Pash before Anichashim Lekecha. So, they're announcing that this is part of the Aseres HaDibros. Bahag says it's not part of the Aseres HaDibros. And again, not that it's important for us altogether, but there are certain people out there who paskin like the Bahag. They have 10 commandments. Their 10 commandments doesn't begin with Hanich Hashem Elokecha. They divide the second into two separate ones, as does the Bahag and the Smag, who came much later. But that's not our point. What is a curiosity is that there is a famous or an infamous copy or a kind of a reproduction of the Aseret HaDibros, which is hanging in a certain courtroom. I think it's in Tennessee. And it was a subject of a tumult, separation of church and state. How can you have this? Is obviously religious. How can it be adorning a secular courtroom? But they were smarter than people who were objecting. They wanted to be interdenominational, so they made it 11 commandments instead of 10. If you look at the pictures of it, it goes from 1 to 11. They want to be Yitzhak, Bahag, and the Rabbah, or Jews and Christians. Forget about that. Whatever the constitutional objections are that there's any kind of religion, let alone whether it favors one religion over another. That's not the point. But it's the machlokes reflects itself. The real point is, and why didn't the Rambam count it among? Why didn't the Bahag count it among the mitzvahs and the Rambam? Yes. The point is fairly obvious, but a little complicated. There is a Ramban in the Sefer HaMitzvahs who explains why the Rambam includes it, and more or less why the Bahag doesn't include it. He says, logically, that it can't be a mitzvah. It's not. How can you have a mitzvah without a mitzvah? If you don't have a mitzvah, then where does the mitzvah come from altogether? And on the other hand, how do you know that there is a mitzvah unless you're mechuyev to accept the mitzvahs? It's where do you start? It's all men are liars. All Christians are liars. I'm a Christian, therefore I'm a liar. Forget about how Bernard Russell tried to weasel out of this, but it doesn't make sense. It's illogical.
Tautology.
It's not just a tautology. You can't tell him. Tautology means that Scott is the author of whatever it was. They're synonymous. I made the subject the predicate. The subject is the predicate. Here you're starting a premise, and by the time you're finished, the first premise is false. The third premise, the conclusion, disproves the first premise. I'm saying all men are liars. All Cretans are liars. I'm a Cretan, therefore I'm a liar. If I'm a Cretan, then it's not true that all Cretans are liars. I lie when I say that. It means all Cretans are liars means they always lie and never tell the truth. So if they never tell the truth, then all Cretans are liars. So Moshe, what's going on here? And if you want to, you can ask the question a little bit differently. What's pshat in the mitzvah? How in the mitzvah in the Hashem Elokecha? How can you command belief? If you believe it, you don't believe it. If you don't believe it, commandments aren't going to make it. Commandments aren't going to make you believe it. The Rambam had no problem with that, and even though he had no problem, he included it in the mitzvahs. The Rambam had no problem with it because the Rambam itself validated. At Har Sinai, Bnei Yisrael were Nevi'im, and they knew Anoich Hashem Elokecha not because Moshe Rabbeinu told it to them. They heard it themselves. How did they hear it? Nevuah. I don't have to believe that it's day outside and not night. It's not belief, it's knowledge. My senses tell me that now it's day. I don't have to believe you when you walk in the door and tell it to me. And if you're telling me something and I'm not ready to accept it from you, you'll tell me, don't believe me, just go and look. That's what the Rambam would have said. You want to know why I have to be Mekayim mitzvahs? I have to be Mekayim mitzvahs because you were at Har Sinai, or at least your ancestors were at Har Sinai, and they saw the Rebbeinu Shalom. Don't ask me that we can't have mitzvahs on the mitzvah, and I don't know there's a mitzvah. Of course you know there's a mitzvah. You were there, your ancestors were there, and they told you about it. There were, it's Aid and GA from one generation to another generation. And Afal PK, he puts it in the mitzvahs. And again, I'm not trying to criticize his cheshbon. The cheshbonis are not terribly important. I don't want to talk about that. I think I talked about it once. How you catalog the mitzvahs in non-Afghanis halacha. Virtually no nafkanis halacha, and certainly none that is necessary. Again, I don't want to repeat things, but Kosal Sefer Krisus, if you divorce your wife and not unless she's an Isha Roa, you're not going to get scar for it. And it's still the Minyan Mitzvahs. And Minyan Mitzvahs is not limited to a woman who you're mechuyev l'garsha. So again, the Chafetz Chaim said that the word mitzvah doesn't mean good deed. It's not in the sense that you're doing things to get brownie points of one kind or another. The word mitzvah literally means it's a subject of itzivui. And his loshen, as they repeated to me, was they're not taryag mitzvahs, they're taryag inyonim. What he meant was taryag inyonim that are regulated. They're things that aren't regulated, do whatever you want. What you eat Friday night for the Suda is not regulated by halacha. It's not even yontif for the chiyuv of simcha. Whatever it is, kol v'aynik, but be my guest. Whatever you think is kol v'aynik for Shabbos. But there are other things which are subject to dogmatic revelation, which we call a mitzvah. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good deed, like a mitzvah in Yiddish. A mitzvah in Yiddish is not the same thing as a mitzvah in Lashon Kodesh. In Lashon Kodesh, it means it's the subject of its evil. In Yiddish, it means it's a good deed and you get scar for it. Those two are not the same. The same word, different languages, has different meanings. So now the question is that whether it's Anoich Hashem Lekecha is part of the Taryag mitzvahs or not part of the Taryag mitzvahs doesn't make a particle of difference. A Yid is mechuyev to believe Anoich Hashem Lekecha, whether it's part of the Taryag or not part of the Taryag. But Kan Haben Shoyel, it's not part of the Taryag. So you tell me, I don't know how I do it, but if I don't believe Tarei Chas v'Sholem, go find out how to believe. But if it's not a mitzvah, so what's going on here? Why should I have to go do it? It's not even regulated. It's nothing. Why do I have to go look for it? So why am I going to believe altogether? And remember again that if there's no mitzvah of Amunah in the Rebbeinu Shalom, then there can't be mitzvahs altogether. Everything is totally in that. So they're basically in Rishonim, there are two ways. The first way is Reb Sadia, who thinks, they call it a priori. I would call it natural law. But Sadia says it very clearly. He says that a person knows instinctively that there is a Rebbeinu Shalom. He knows it. You don't have to teach it to him. So what? So it's a Rebbeinu Shalom. And now, how do I know they gave it to her in the first place? I wasn't there. How do I know that I have to believe everything that's there? To which he answers, or why do I have to follow what's there? Of course he gave it. He gave it, so what? What makes me mechuyev to fulfill whatever he says? And I'm my analogy, but he says that if somebody created you, if you're going to figure out the Rebbeinu Shalom is the creator, we'll skip that step in a minute. We'll skip that step for the moment. If I know that there's a creator, then I owe makar satayv. My dimion, my mashal is like children to parents. Psychologically, children want to keep their parents happy. Don't talk to me about rebellious child. It happens, but basically, naturally, just look at little kids. Kids do what the parents want them to do, but until they get money, then they rebel. Then they have their own roots. But basically, the roots of the child starts out as being the roots of the parents. And why is it roots of the parents? Because they know whose side the bread is buttered. That's they're taking care of them. He realizes that he's been taken care of. When he gets hungry, where does he go? When the baby wants to breastfeed, where does he go? He understands all of this. Therefore, he understands that there has to be a kind of akara sotay. That's a priori. That's natural law. And says the subsadia. That's why you have to accept mitzvahs. Once you figured out that the Rebbeinu Shalom exists, you do that, and then you know that there was mitzvah, so you have a chiyuv to accept everything that he was mitzvah. That's the standard analysis in medieval Jewish philosophy. There's a second mahalach which is more obscure. I know it only from a Tshuvas Rivosh. The Tshuvas Rivosh is Shin Tzadik Tes, but it's not the Tshuvas Rivosh. The Rivosh is quoting a Ramban in the Sefer HaMekach. I wouldn't know that there was a Sefer HaMekach till I saw the Rivosh. But the Sefer HaMekach was reprinted a couple of years ago. It's there. You can go look at the Sefer HaMekach. The Ramban says that the chiyuv to be mekayim mitzvahs comes from the koyach hatzibur. The tzibur has the koyach to force people to do what it wants. And why? And it's, Mishpah HaMekach. I don't remember. I think it's Mishpah HaMekach. No, or maybe it's probably Mishpah HaChera. Yeah. Sorry. Mishpah HaChera knew about before. This is probably Mishpah HaChera. In any event, he says that this is the Koyach HaTzibur. The tzibur has the koyach to do virtually whatever it wants. And why does the tzibur have the koyach to do whatever it wants? And he talks about all things, lots of things like Hanukkah, Mikra Megillah, where did it come from? It's the Rabbanon gave them the power. Don't confuse me. But he says it was the koyach tzibur. The tzibur gave them the power to make Hanukkah, to make Purim, to make all kinds of things. And where do they get this from? No, if Hobbes knew how to read Hebrew, I would have said that he plagiarized Leviathan from the Ramban, because it's exactly what he says in the Leviathan. People emerged from the jungle, and what did they do? They made a tzibur. And what's a tzibur? The tzibur has all kinds of rights that Yechidim don't have. Why does the tzibur have such rights? Because they ceded their authority to the tzibur. And they gave the tzibur to do all kinds of terrible things. So I entered into a contract with the tzibur. I gave the tzibur to do all kinds of things. Now I have to obey it. Who says I have to obey a contract? Man must honor contracts made. The third one of his natural laws. He says that's a priori. If you made a promise, not every promise maybe, but you made a pact, you made a treaty, you made this kind of social contract, this social compact that arose as a result of whatever happened when they came out of the jungle. This gave the tzibur the power over every one of its members. And what about the Nelodim, or people who come to some particular tzibur from way out yonder? You come, you accepted, when you became an American citizen, you pledged allegiance. You said you're going to abide by the laws of the tzibur. When you're born, you were born into it. You don't like it, why don't you leave? So Ramban says that's why Jews have to be mekayim the mitzvah. They entered into a contract with Rebbeinu Shalom. They accepted the Torah, and now they have to keep it because it's a koyach hatzibur. How did they enter in the first place? They entered into it because they were not a yochid. The yochid can't do these things. A tzibur did all of this. And once they entered into the tzibur, the tzibur becomes mechuyev. So kan haben shoyel before Pesach and the ben rosh. I'm asking why. I know Tom says if I don't like it, leave the society. Why can't I go to Outer Mongolia? I can't leave the tzibur here. Why can't I go to Outer Mongolia? I know there are no Jews in Outer Mongolia. How do I know there are no Jews in Outer Mongolia? Because every year Chabad has a dinner, and they're shluchim for the whole world. Everybody gets up and says where I'm from. Nobody got up and said I'm from Outer Mongolia. So I know I can go to Outer Mongolia. If there were Jews in Outer Mongolia, they'd usually not there. I know I can go to Outer Mongolia and there are no other Jews. And what tzibur is going to be clear for me? I left the tzibur. No, the whole reason is you can't leave the tzibur. You're part of the tzibur. I want to leave. The Ramban, I don't want to misrepresent. The Ramban says it's chal on nelodim also. I want to know why it's chal on nelodim. And the Ramban doesn't explain. He says it's chal on nelodim. So this is, whatever I have to offer. If I need to contribute to this, is why it's chal on the tzibur. I know what's chal on the tzibur. You know what's chal on the tzibur? Because a tzibur is not a conglomerate of individuals. A tzibur is a corporation. And a corporation is an entity bifnei atzmai. And this came into its existence at Har Sinai. And tzibur loimes, corporations don't die. Corporations continue. Tzibur is a tzibur, and I can't take myself out of the tzibur. It's impossible. Once you became part of the tzibur, I can't remove myself. How do I know that? Because Bleich said so. Bleich says once you enter this, you can't leave. You can leave anything you like, but you can't. Is nevertheless Israel. You can't declare yourself a non-Jew. Going down to Mongolia isn't going to help you. So what does this mean? This means that I'm explaining the Ramban on the side that there is such a thing as a tzibur. I know there's a tzibur only if from one pshat in Rashi and Chumash and Parshas Karach, and the one definition of the limud of Hillel with regard to Korban Pesach, that there is such a thing as a tzibur. What do I need a tzibur for? For Korban tzibur. It's not a conglomerate of Korban Hashutvim. It's a new entity, and that's the same thing that keeps me from going to Outer Mongolia and saying that the Hachokas Rabbeinu Tam don't apply in Outer Mongolia. They only apply to that's a whole part of the Hachok. I can go wherever I want. and you can't run after me. All the takonis and the xeris and the chromim are only chal on that tzibur. They can't go beyond that tzibur. I'm part of the tzibur of Klal Yisrael, and whatever was given to Klal Yisrael, I can't renounce because I'm part of that tzibur. That comes almost by definition. So once we reach that, we have a definition of a tzibur, but there's one thing that's kind of a steer to me. The steer to, and it's the ultimate raya. We have a Maimer Chazal that tells us that he feared me harpor and vosmer of the kodesh, mam the shir sachalum v'loshen, often the Torah and they refused it. But if often the Torah and they refused it, he's offering the same thing he offered Jews at Har Sinai. He wants to make everything's binding for future days. So I'll turn around and say, we're not a tzibur. You can't bind us for future days. The answer is that it's haba hotalia. When did Klal Yisrael become a tzibur? When they accepted the Torah. And chas v'sholem, if some Uvaloshan would have accepted it before us, when the Rebbeinu was busy running around peddling it, they would have been the Am Segulo. He would have declared them the tzibur, and they'd be the only corporation that exists. And Jews would be like anybody else. But the Kabbalah Satira and the creation of a tzibur called Klal Yisrael, that's Gita Yodeh Von Kechad. They kept the two sides of the same coin. The Rebbeinu created the tzibur when he created the Torah. When he gave the Torah, he mandated that it be accepted by something that he called the tzibur. A corporation is a creature of statute. Everybody knows that. A tzibur is the creation of statute. Who made the statute? The Rebbeinu made the statute. We can't make a statute for a very simple reason. We can't make a tzibur, a corporation, for a very simple reason. We can't create metaphysical entities. Try making a malach. It's only the Rebbeinu Shalom who can create metaphysical entities. It's part of the deal. Man has a physical universe, and he can create physical entities. The Rebbeinu Shalom has a metaphysical universe, and he can create metaphysical universes. He is the only one who can create a tzibur. And now, Am Nivra, the Hallel Ko, he created this. It's my own Russia. He created this, the Hallel Ko. Now you accept the Torah. That's the Hilula of the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's the Hallel. I made you, I made the tzibur, I made the Torah, and I put them all together. And you can't resign. You can't go looking someplace else because you can't dissolve the corporation. You can't dissolve a corporation. He can give you the right to do it. He made it. He can dissolve. He can dissolve whatever corporations he wants. But you don't have the power to dissolve the corporation because the Rebbeinu Shalom didn't give you the power to dissolve that corporation. I think that's pshat. The Ramban doesn't explain it, and I think that it's really on the kuna of the Ramban. He doesn't explain why it's binding on 16 generations and why I can't just remove myself. If you're talking about something which is only the Koyach HaTzibur, then as a Koyach HaTzibur, I should be able to remove myself from the tzibur. I'm not bound by the tzibur, just like I'm not bound by other things that come only from the tzibur. Now, having said all of that, let me go back just a little bit. I'll make a chesimet and the psicha. We're already over time. A couple of weeks ago, when Rabbi Willig said something, I proceeded to talk about, maybe he mentioned it, I don't remember, it was Sabayis. Achim before the Chalukah, what are they? So I think Rabbi Willig talked about I'm sorry, Rabbi Elchanan called it a new entity. It was Sabayis, and we were what nomenclature to use. Why is that? And I insisted it's because the Torah created it. I can't create it. Sure it is, but only the Rebbeinu Shalom can create what I call the corporation, a tzibur, and Tfusas Habayis. The Rebbeinu Shalom can create Tfusas Habayis. I can't create Tfusas Habayis. I can't create anything similar to Tfusas Habayis. That was Shitasa. I only changed the nomenclature that Rabbi Willig used. I don't think Rabbi Chanan is right. Yeah, I am Rabbi Willig and Rabbi Chanan, it's the same thing. But I have a simpler explanation than the Bochanans. I know why there is Tuasas Habayis. There's in the Machlekes Rishonim with regard to Yisur Hana, whether there's Bailus on Yisur Hana, is there Yisur Gezel on Yisur Hana. What's this all about? If you go to a law school, again, that's why it's the end and if you take a class in property, it's more likely than not that the first day the professor is going to walk into class and give a patch on the dish and bang on the stender, and he's going to say that property is a bundle of rights. What he means by a bundle of rights, I'm not really interested in, but he will emphasize that you have different kinds of rights. He'll explain one right, the other right, the third right, and he will tell you that's all there is. And you can divide property into different rights, and therefore, what follows from this, you can separate the rights, and you can transfer some rights without other rights, riparian rights, the right to the water, without right to anything else, servitudes, whatever you want. But it's absolutely incorrect in halacha. That's why halacha has a different perspective on the whole business. It's wrong, at least according to the Rishonim mold, that there is a Yisur Gezel and Yisur Hana, because there's Bailus and Yisur Hana. What rights do you have to Yisur Hana? You have zero rights to Yisur Hana. There's nothing you can do with it. You can't have any enough from it. And don't talk about Shleik Derech Hana. Shleik Derech Hana could also be the rights. But if you're not allowed to have Hana, what does it mean to say it's mine? I'm talking about, again, I don't like these words. Kant would have called it a ding an sich. Locke would have called it a substratum. It's something we call the Chaymer Yuli. There's something which doesn't have any attributes. It's matter, pure matter, nothing more than matter. You can't describe it in any other way except the Chaymer Yuli, whatever. Hylic substance, they translate into English. But it's got no adjectives. There's no way to describe it. It's just thing by itself. Property is a thing by itself, a ding an sich, literally. And everything else comes afterwards. And that's why Yisur Hana can have Bailin. I have Bailus on the Chaymer Yuli. Eventually I had Bailus on the Chaymer Yuli too, even though it didn't have the attributes. So he created the Chaymer Yuli. That's why it was his. So there can be such a thing as a Chaymer Yuli. The only thing that can the only thing that can have a non-physical existence, the only thing that has a non-physical existence is a metaphysical entity. I can't create a metaphysical entity. Metaphysical entities, you can create legal fictions, if you like. You can legislate a corporation, but that doesn't make it real. It's a myth. But there's some person who can legislate myths, and not myths anymore. The Bleich legislated Klal Yisrael. He created, for lack of another term, I'll coin one, corporate Israel. The only corporation that exists. The Tzibur, which is called Klal Yisrael, and the others didn't want it. Other Muslims could have had it, then we wouldn't have had it. But now it's corporate Israel, not corporate Yishmael or whatever it might be. And the Rebbeinu Shalom decided that he was going to create another corporation. It's called Tuasas Habayis. Tuasas Habayis is metaphysical. What is it? It's the thing without any rights. I don't have it. If Rachim Shecholko are not Shutzvim, then what was in between? Can I go steal from them? Of course I can't steal from them. What do they have there? They have no rights. They can, sure, they can demand chalukah. All Shutzvim can demand chalukah. And if there's any braver, then it can't be Mafreya. So what would be what they have from Mafreya? Why can't they go steal before they divide it? But after they divide it, I can't steal Mafreya. But if I manage to get the chaparan before they divide it, why can't they do it? The answer is they own something called Tuasas Habayis, which is not strictly metaphysical. Eventually created it because otherwise I wouldn't be masig it. It's the ding an sich. It's the property without attributes. So of course there is property which is more than a bundle of rights. There's no rights to chukas hashutzvim until the mechalek. One goes into before the chukas hashutzvim is each one from the other. All it is this underlying entity which we call what the Rebbeinu Shalom created. That's called property. That's called what I own. I can own the property because Rebbeinu Shalom told me I can own it. He created it. He can create metaphysical things. He can create physical things too. I'm not quite sure what the substratum is I'm talking about. I suspect it's metaphysical. What difference does it make? Because Rebbeinu Shalom created it. I don't care whether you call it physical the way some people wanted to call it, or you call it a metaphysical entity. There is no such thing as any such idea as the product of human convention. The Rebbeinu Shalom is only one who can create the Sibur. He did it once in eternity. He made Klal Yisrael. Other things we can talk about afterwards, but that's all there is, and that's how we can understand Korban Pesach. And it turns out to be the case, unfortunately, as I began, that we come with a different kind of perspective, and the perspective has been influenced to a huge degree by what we pick up in the streets, what we picked up in kindergarten. But we're taught all of this, and you have to overcome it. You know, we're all Bali Tshuva. I said before at the beginning that I'm a third generation American. My great-grandchildren are different. They don't have the same intellectual mischievous that my generation had. My generation grew up differently. And before we learned anything, we learned all the things that we had to speedily forget. All of the prejudices, intellectual prejudices that were ingrained in us, we got from, not from Missouri, we got it from elsewhere, and you had to make an effort to overcome it. Lahavdil, no comparison, but like the Tiferes Yisrael with this little story about Moshe Rabbeinu. And again, can't talk anymore about the Sinai Rabbim. Some people succeed better, some people succeed less, and some don't even try. Some of them remain that way till May of Esrim Shana, because they're left with, it's a kind of quasi-Avodah Zarah, we call it, intellectual kind of Avodah Zarah. A Weltanschauung with a set of principles and the even ethical and moral norms that have nothing to do with Judaism. Usually, there's no such thing as the Judeo-Christian morality. It's a misnomer. But to the point where people think there is. And they've sold it to people out there. And that's because Nebuch, we have this original sin called Americanism. We're born into it, and we have to overcome it. That's come.
Next week, I think we'll see on Tuesday at 3 o'clock. Hopefully back.
We'll see.
We'll see. Look at that.